Katie and I first met, we finally figured it out 5 years ago. It was one of the first stories that Emergence magazine published, and we knew it was going to be about the pin oak tree in Deering Oaks Park. And Katie came here to work on that story with me, and together we took on the small task of figuring out how to map the universe onto the rings of that pin oak tree. And as a way to explore deep time and also the miracle of life. So the story parallels the moment of the Big Bang with the spark of life that emerges from an acorn that might grow into something like the pin oak. We had a wonderful time. And I was really honored that she invited me to be a contributor to her book, which she's going to tell you more about shortly, with another essay I wrote for Emergence about tree migration in Maine, which I'll read a little bit from in a few minutes.
And I guess I just want to start by saying thank you, Chelsea, thank you Rose and Becca and Back Cove Books for having me. It's wonderful to be in Portland, Maine after all of these years. Now you have little aspen and an aspen planted in the garden and apple trees. And the pin oak that Chelsea mentioned, the project for Emergence, and I don't know if you all know of Emergence magazine. So this is the second volume. They make printed volumes. You can see they're totally luscious and gorgeous. This happens to be my stone alphabet on the cover of this one. And the fourth one is coming out any minute now, and we also both have new works in it. So Chelsea's tree migration piece, some of which is in the language of trees, is there, and I have new work that's to do with my dysautonomia. I have this form of long COVID that affects my vagus nerve, my heart and my breathing, all of these basic systems. My autonomic nervous system is broken. So if I get kind of breathless, I think I'm okay now sitting here, but even sitting up can cause odd things to happen. So I'm just putting that out there. So that's my excuse when my brain goes completely, I don't get brain fog, I just have white out. It like literally goes white, blank. But the fact that Emergence, they're prominently displayed here beside us because they are beautiful, but also because they brought us together. And so they have these print volumes, but they also exist online. So there will be, we've got this looping images because it's just nicer to let it do its thing and we don't have to give you a lecture about each image. But there will be an image, little video that plays of that piece. It's multimedia. So if you go on our website, Emergence Magazine, you can explore all these incredible things. And it's like a family, right? Emergence has created a community of people, some of whom magically ended up in my book, because the language of trees is a community. It's a gathering place of people. It's a book about trees, but it's really about people as well, and storytelling. So we've got, Robert McFarlane is The Lost Words is over there, and Robin Wall Kimmerer, and all of these people who, it's just such an honor to be in community with them. So even though it's the two of us here talking today, I kind of feel like their voices and stories are also kind of behind us. And so yes, it's thank you to all of you for coming out on such a beautiful day. If it was me, I would be sitting under a tree somewhere. I wonder if we should start with, before I get into the nitty-gritty of what the language of trees is, should I do that first, explain the tree alphabet, or would you like to read something? How do you feel? Does anyone feel strongly one way or the other? This is a collaborative event.
I'd be glad to read.
Because some people like reading immediately. Usually I'm in the audience. I'm known as a visual artist, and that's why I'm all about the visuals. So I'm in the audience for a lot of readings, and that's usually what I do. I'm not usually in the hot seat, in the chair. And I've noticed that sometimes people will come up and they won't even say hello or anything, they'll just start reading. And then other people are like, whoa, no, I really want to chat and talk, and then they do the reading afterwards. So if you feel you're good,
I'll go for it.
Great.
And I'll just show you, this is the essay I'm about to read translated into tree, which Katie will talk more about. So this is from an essay called They Carry Us With Them, The Great Tree Migration. When we think of migration, what often comes to mind is the seasonal movement of animals from one region to another. a repeated pattern journey in which creatures are drawn in one direction toward a food supply or resource, and in the other direction toward breeding grounds. Thousands of species of migratory creatures, at least 4,000 species of birds alone, embark on epic journeys across and around the world every year, as they are pulled into flowing patterns of movement that correspond to the sun's steady pull on the earth. Birds, insects, mammals, and fish follow felt sensory signals in currents of air and water, changes in seasons, the planet's magnetic field, the position of the sun and stars, subtle changes in temperature. Earth's ecological systems in this way are woven together by intricate and far-reaching threads of movement. What about our rooted companions? The northeastern spruce fir forests that the Bicknell's thrush journeys to every spring, or the stands of jack pine where the eastern bluebird builds its nests. We often admire trees for their steady rootedness, their resiliency in the face of change, for the gift of shade and companionship that a single long-lived tree might offer us, and then our children and our grandchildren, even our great-grandchildren. But trees, or more appropriately forests, are perhaps not so rooted, so reliably placed as we might think. Right now, around the world, trees are on the move. Some scientists prefer the phrase shifts in range to migration when it comes to forests, ecosystems defined by long-lived woody beings that cannot pull up their roots from beneath the forest floor and walk or swim or fly when conditions around them indicate that it is time to do so. But trees do move. They simply do it through successive generations. Trees reproduce primarily through seed dispersal, relying upon animals, winds, and waters to carry their offspring to fertile soils where they might anchor into the ground and germinate. A mature tree will send seeds in all directions. In a stable environment where conditions are much the same as when the parent tree began its life, a forest might continue to regenerate in roughly the same location and the same configuration of species year after year, decade after decade. But what if a new generation of seeds is cast into the wind during a period of drought? What if winters are no longer as cold as they once were? What if a certain pest can now survive in a forest where it once could not? Suddenly, seedlings might find themselves in a less friendly environment that they are not genetically well adapted to. Perhaps the only ones that will survive are those that happen to be carried, say, northward, or to a slightly higher elevation. As the climate changes in and around forests, seeds might succeed in places where they did not before, or fail where they once succeeded. If this pattern continues, the forest will begin a slow journey in a new direction. Thus, although they do not move in a to and fro pattern annually in the way of the humpback whale, migration still seems an apt word to describe the movements of trees, even if such patterns of movement may take several or many human generations to reveal themselves as patterns. Certainly, trees do not migrate seasonally in the way we think normally of seasons, but there are many things trees do that don't fit easily into our normal human way of thinking, at least from our point of view, which tends to have a breadth of focus corresponding to our roughly 80-year lifespan. For example, if we here in the northeastern United States were to zoom out from our understanding of seasons as annual patterns and step instead into a deeper time, we might begin to see seasons in a different way. From this vantage point, a season may be seen as more akin to, say, an era of glaciation. Let's step back to 14,600 years ago, near the end of the Pleistocene, that phenomenal age of ice when glaciers ebbed and flowed over the land. We might notice that as the Laurentide ice sheet begins its slow retreat as temperatures warm, spruce trees are flowing up from the south. We watch as pointed evergreens with splays of emerald needles work their way across present-day Maine and southern Quebec, spreading farther into Canada, settling along the rocky slopes and poorly drained soils that were recently carved from the ice. Fast forward 3,000 years to the beginning of the Holocene. The climate is warmer and drier, the ice sheet is vanishing further, the range of the spruce is now shrinking as the trees are pushed farther northward and replaced by pine to the south. Then in the mid-Holocene, roughly 6,000 years later, there is a period of drought. Much of the eastern hemlock disappears as the lack of water leaves the trees stressed and vulnerable to the infestation of a pest that overtakes the population. It will take 2,000 years for the hemlock to return. During this time, spruce moves southward again, settling into roughly the configuration that we find them in today. From this long view of time, the movement of trees might appear to be as fluid and flowing as that of an Arctic tern. For millions of years, the world's forests have been migrating in this way, drawn and pulled in one direction or another by the eras and eons of climate that our Earth has undergone in its long life, and they have done so quite successfully. Through the more than dozen glaciations that occurred during the Quaternary period and the corresponding dramatic shifts in climate and temperature, just one species of tree is believed to have gone extinct in North America. The rest were able to keep up, largely through long-distance seed dispersal. Migration, thus, is not new to forests, but the 21st century climate crisis has greatly diminished the ability of trees to move effectively. Changes in climate and landscape are happening so quickly and introducing so many new and unexpected factors: onslaughts of pests, invasive plants, fungal disease, built environments that dissect and isolate ecosystems, that forests often cannot move fast enough to account for changing environmental factors. The Earth now has an atmospheric CO2 concentration of 419 parts per million, the highest the planet has seen in 3 to 5 million years. In 2019, NASA stated that 18 of the 19 warmest years on record had occurred since 2001. Around the world, scores of species of trees are moving north or west or upslope. Some species are losing ground, others are gaining it. In the eastern United States, 86 species of trees are currently on the move. Pines, spruce, and firs are generally heading north. Oaks and maples are heading west. Here in Maine, 7 of the 10 most common species of tree are predicted to have moderate to severe reductions in suitable habitat within a century. What do these changes to our forests mean? What are the trees taking with them, and what is arriving in their wake? What is the relationship between the trees' migration and the ecological systems and human communities that they are leaving behind? What does the movement of these beings reflect back to us in the present and foreshadow for the future? How do we bear witness? How do we bid farewell?
Thank you. And I don't know if anyone's got tears in their eyes, but it's just so beautiful. Like that's how the book kind of ends. I have an afterword that comes after that, with the bibliography and the sources and all that stuff that goes at the back of the book. But it really felt appropriate in so many ways to end there, because you present this new way of thinking, proposing that we have a deeper, and this is a big thread through the book, I think, is deep time, trying to get into tree time and moving beyond our human way of thinking about now, yesterday, everything happening so quickly. And if only we could just slow down, the way COVID forced us all to slow down and stop and breathe, which is a big part of the dysautonomia that I have. I have to literally lie down and breathe. And I feel like you offered such a gift. It's obviously sad and distressing and emotional, but there is this this gift of thinking beyond the short-term time frame of seasons, spring, summer, autumn, winter. And I don't want to get into politics. I don't know if we're going to have that kind of conversation, but I always think of the 4-year time cycle of politics. So everything happens like in these small cycles rather than larger, more realistic time frames of a life, a community beyond the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren, and the fact that forests move. And it's so beautiful. So I'm so grateful. Thank you. And the images, I don't know if you want to mention the visuals that are related. So when you experience it online on the Emergence website and you read and you can hear Chelsea's piece, there are also these, actually that's the tree that brought us together. And then this is me drawing in the studio, and then it'll move into the drawing that I made, the chalk drawing, where we try to condense, like Chelsea mentioned, the seed, the acorn seed, expanding it in and out from the entire universe. Ridiculous. I think a lot of what I do, this is not what Chelsea does, but I'm Irish, let's put that out there first and foremost. So I've got the baggage of the Irish literature, Joyce, Beckett, but this notion that Beckett writes about fail again, try again, fail again, and the futility of a human life, and you're trying, I wanted to be a scientist, but I failed at that, but we are always trying to understand how things work, and we claim that we know how it works, and that's kind of, not that it's like I appreciate science, there are a lot of scientists in the book and science writing, but I guess the fact that we want to know and learn things, and sometimes it's in the doing, right? The play, we spent the morning with Aspen, Chelsea's daughter, exploring the garden and walking and going to the community garden, and it's the stopping and the going slow and the looking and being outside, play and learning through play. So I'm going around in circles, but it's a long-winded way of saying thank you so much for sharing your words and love of life, because I think that comes through, right? Even though it's sad and it's really difficult to think about these things, it's the love that's where it's coming from.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yes, it is so grounded in love, and I've been thinking a lot with Aspen, who's my daughter's 2, and is just present and lovely and so full of love, and it's helped clarify for me this thread that I also think is in this book, which is that we sort of don't have the choice not to have hope, but facing what we have to face also really clarifies the shape of the darkness, I think, but in some ways facing it can really be an act of love and witness. And
right, and you end with that, bearing witness. And I see that at a local level with, okay, maybe I will return to politics, but when I've been going across country, I've literally gone from New York to California, up the West Coast, and then Amtrak. I'm a big supporter of Amtrak, and my publisher Tin House for letting me take the book tour that slowly, and the as I go from venue to venue to venue, the bearing witness. So yes, now I'm sorry, this is my brain trying to catch up with my mouth. The communities, everywhere I go, right, somebody is fighting a city or a council, or they're fighting to save trees. They're being chopped down everywhere. It's happening in Ireland as well, and in the UK, where I'm going on the next part of the book tour. And it's at a local level where humans, people who are in the audience, are saying, well, the trees in our block have either been chopped down or they're going to be chopped down. How do we stop it from happening? And it's community groups coming together. And in New York, where I spend a lot of time, there's the Save East River Park group. There's some images. So that's me in the subway with the Save the Trees sign. And the Extinction Rebellion groups. That's Andrea Bowers in the bottom left. She came to New York for some of the protests. And so we come together, Save East River Park is to try and fight the city. So the city is chopping down the entire East River Park and 1,000 mature trees in order to do a climate resiliency project to raise it up 8 feet, and somehow that's going to protect the entire city from rising sea levels. So it doesn't make any sense, but you have people who come together to bear witness. They know they can't stop this city because the city's bigger than they are, and they've already killed and wood chipped 500 and maybe more since I left of these trees. But they've said it, when I've spoken to different activists, at least we are bearing witness. So the trees aren't just being murdered with nobody noticing. We're here, we're having gatherings, so it's people coming together, we're acknowledging and we're documenting it and we're speaking out. And that's happening in communities all over. I formed a group, that's another one of the images, is Friends of Ardee Bog, and that's about it protecting a peatland, which is related to trees and forests, because that's how the peat was formed, when the trees that were there in over 10,000 years, when the ice moved back. So your essay kind of touches on everything, these deep time limits. Like our ecosystems and landscapes didn't just appear, right? They've been formed over thousands and thousands of years. But the community level of everything, of our relationships with each other as humans, but with other species, it occurs over and over. So as I've traveled across country, this bearing witness is something that comes up a lot. And where do we go? Like you mentioned hope, that little word. I think it's through action, right? That's what gives you hope, and coming together with other people who feel the same, because you can feel very lonely if it's just you on your own feeling all of these emotions, because these emotions are so large. Like Timothy Morton talks about the hyper object that climate change is, that these phenomena are so large. Like, how can you possibly wrap our teeny tiny little human brains around something like the climate crisis, the fact that our species is teetering on the brink of extinction, and we're pushing most other species to extinction. This is too much to comprehend, to think about. So what do you do as a human? You fall in love all over again. That's why we make books. We come together in spaces like this. What do you think?
Well, I was just going to say that I think that's why trees are so important, because we were talking earlier about how it's so easy to feel disconnected. I think I struggle with that at some point every single day. It's also so easy to feel reconnected, and trees are ways that Katie has just been telling me about all these people who have come to her events and have brought their personal stories of trees and their relationships with very specific trees, and even meeting with this pin oak. It's so easy to remember what connection is, and that feels, even when it's bearing witness to something that causes so much grief, I still find there to just be hope in our capacity for that love.
We did it this afternoon, right? We sat underneath the trees in your garden, and the breeze, right, today was beautiful. So sitting there in the shade, if we weren't in the shade, it would have been too hot. and it's as simple as the leaves. I could have sat there forever. That's all I want. I want to be a tree, and if only we could, life could be that simple. I know that's a ridiculous thing to say, because we're all caught up in the complexities of being humans and being part of the system and working and all those stresses. But I think it does come over again and again, that the love that you can connect with almost anybody through trees, right? Because everybody has a memory of a tree or a favorite tree, or they connect us in so many ways. And maybe I should mention what the tree alphabet is all about, because maybe some of you have no clue. Like, what is this book? So it's called The Language of Trees, but the original version was called About Trees, and that was back in 2015. I was turning 40, but I didn't tell anybody. Now I talk about it all the time, but at the time it was a big secret. I wanted to make a really beautiful book about trees, but really about what it is to be a human on planet Earth, and what is a lifetime of being here. Because in those 40 years, I've seen how we've moved from the Holocene into the Anthropocene. So our species, we have affected every biological system on the planet, and we have created a whole new planetary ecosystem in a tiny amount of time. So to kind of acknowledge that, to think about the time frame, much larger time frames, is that possible? So to gather together, kind of to create a compendium of different voices, and to root it all in the tree alphabet. So I've made drawings over the years, and I made a series of tree drawings. When I was in New York, of New York City trees, and drawn in the grid the way the city streets are. So it was a way of mapping my walks around the city. And I realized 10 years after I made the first one of these tree drawings, wait a minute, those are like love letters. The trees themselves could be the letters. They could replace the A to Z, like the ABC of the alphabet. And so instead of an A, so I saw a blank piece of paper, and instead of an A typing, when you tap on a computer, an apple tree appears. So it was a pretty instantaneous realization that I could use the trees. They are the characters, and they could speak for us or translate our words letter by letter and slow us down, right? Because translation is a slowing down to read. I'm Irish, so being European, you have a lot more access than you do here to French, German, Spanish. so I speak some of them. I don't speak Spanish, but French and German a little bit, and that's slowing down and how your brain has to pause and think about language and what's being said is it's difficult, but it's really useful, I think, and it's part of the slowing down that I've been trying to do before COVID slowed us down officially. And so this moment of realization that the tree drawings could become an alphabet and we could replace the human letters, because the alphabet itself is also a man-made, or it's a man-made invention, right? But it comes from the real world. So the letter A was ram's horns. James Bridle conversation with Krista Tippett reminded me that the Q was the monkey's tail. But we forget all of that now. We've become so disconnected from what the alphabet originally was. But those 26 little letters, we can use those to create any word in the universe. Like, how magical is that? It's like a magic, and Rob McFarlane and Jackie Morris get to that, the magic beauty of the alphabet and our words that we use. So everything in the book is translated into this tree alphabet. And so the longer texts, like Chelsea's, become forests. I get in trouble when I say that I'm not a writer, but I'm, as I said, coming from the visuals, I get so excited to see, look, I wrote an essay and this is the forest, and I think it's a very pretty forest. But you can see how this line through the forest is acknowledgement of the footnotes at the bottom. So the formatting is reflected in, and it kind of shows, like in Elizabeth Colbert's essay, it worked out incredible, because her piece is talking about cutting through the Amazon and these straight lines that are created. And her piece with the paragraph break is a straight line cutting straight through it. So it was like the trees in a way were mirroring what was happening in the text. Accidentally or coincidentally, it just happened like that. And then there are other shorter pieces where you can see letter by letter, so you can read what's being said. And then there are random other drawings that I got to include new drawings. So, where to now? Yes, questions.
I have a question for you. I have been writing a bit lately about forest and imagination, and I was thinking about growing up in Oklahoma, where we had a lot of trees around us and individual trees that I have memories of. But I realized as I was writing this chapter that actually my first memory of a forest is one I created from a book that I was reading, because in Oklahoma we didn't have big, old, deep, dark forests. But I was thinking more about it and just remembering that image of a forest, as connected with this book, which was a magical, mythical book, shaped my experience of then encountering a real forest, and then the way that encountering real forests changed the way I read about forests. And I wanted to ask you about the importance of having a visual language in a book, because it feels so imaginative and rich, and it feels like those worlds of word and land are really blending in just a way I've never seen in another book before.
Yeah, well, I guess I've always been, I fell in love with books when I was really small, and I loved encyclopedias and atlases where you would have visuals and text together. And a lot of my work over the years, so I haven't really explained, but the other images that are spiraling around are, the book was made in 1 year. It was a very, Tin House did this amazing job to make it happen. There's a sense of urgency, like we're in a crisis and we need these messages to come out now. But there was really like 20 plus years of work going into it, so some of that is there, and if anyone's interested in the Q&A later, we can talk about those images. But so for me, you can see a lot of it is black and white, text. I think that goes back to this love I've always had of knowledge, of libraries themselves, and bookshops and bookstores, and bringing all that we have as humans and storytellers together. And that, for me, that's visual as well as text. And I see things in 3 dimensions. So when I see language, I think of it as a very physical thing. I was going to show this. I'm not sure if this is really answering your question, but one of the drawings included is ink. So it's not the tree alphabet. It's writing in English with ink, and then I kind of squish it. I fold it over like a pressed flower. So the words, it's just OM, that universal. I did some meditation this afternoon every Friday evening with my meditation group that started in March 2020. And OM is apparently the original sound of the universe. I don't know if there are scientists, I should find out if there are scientists who got that kind of information to share. But I just thought by writing it repeatedly, but to me it's, I wanted to include the image because it shows my relationship. Also there's a recipe for making oak gall ink, so you can make your own ink, but then the fact that I see language as being a physical thing, it's not just a mark on a page. So these drawings exist, so you make a mark and maybe it smudges and that maybe they look like insects or it could move, and that there is this, like also that our words are alive, so words matter was, after the 2016 election, we realized how important truth is, words, and that they also evolve. So that you have linguists now who talk a lot, are very excited because we're seeing in real time how our language is growing, evolving, it's not static. Communities are creating new words all the time, and some of them get it included into dictionaries. The reason Rob and Jackie created the lost words was because they were being removed. So the Oxford Junior Dictionary was removing words like bluebell and blackberry, the words that we know, and replacing them with BlackBerry the phone and computerized words, so taking away the nature words, and they freaked out, and a lot of other people freaked out and said you can't remove these words, and so how we are I keep talking about us as a species, but we evolve, and our languages too. And I think for me the tree alphabet was like a nice simple it felt like a playful way to talk about these much bigger, longer issues that feel really urgent, but we don't know how to talk about them. Having a hashtag that says words matter felt kind of limited. So to think, and also to think beyond a human way, because I've always been so connected with plants. Growing up in rural Ireland, hands in the dirt, growing, the cycle of life was part of how I relate to the world, but plants and the cows in the fields. And this offering of something that's beyond a human language felt really important to me. I didn't know if I would connect with other people, but to at least offer something that was a way to think outside of our human brain. So a tree alphabet was, to go back to the playful side of it, maybe an accessible way to have an ABC. You can talk to kids about it. It's not, hopefully it's more than that, but that's definitely a part of it, is to think beyond the human, to offer that possibility. Because I think, we put ourselves at the top of the pyramid, right? That you've the human, you've got man, and then you have all the other species underneath us. And God said, I'm Irish, so I grew up with this Catholic, the creation, God made the universe in 6 days, and then man rested, but you have dominion over all of the other species. And that's completely and utterly ridiculous. Who are we to decide what happens to everybody else? So it's to decenter us, to take the human out, because everybody is community. I get this question, I've had this question a lot at events, can trees talk? Do trees talk? But it's about communication, and everything is communicating all of the time. Like I made the stone alphabet because the stones are also alive. There's geological movement happening all of the time, right? Plate tectonics, earthquakes we've seen horrifically in Turkey. But the fact that they're communicating, but our species can't tap in and hear because we don't know how to listen, or we are so self-centered. It's all about us. So it was hopefully an offering to try and think and realize, the birds are singing. And David Haskell, our emergence colleague, has written a lot about this, how there's communication if we can just slow down and listen. And I'm going to keep talking about slowing down.
Thank you. Yeah, I think what you said is so true, that your book both pulls us out of our human brains, but in a way I think it also deepens our humanity by reminding us that humans are connected creatures, and it's we are fundamentally part of everything around us, and it is just such a beautiful thing in a book to be reminded in a very sort of literal way that this is an ecosystem, and stories are parts of, even just thinking of ecosystems as story and imagination, and we aren't actually ever just individuals coming up with our own thoughts and our own, and just being reminded. I feel like your book is a reminder of kind of the deeper parts of ourselves that we can step into that actually help us reconnect to. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I love that you mentioned myth as well, because that's something that I've been trying to dig to remind myself of the Irish myths that they almost try to make us forget. Like, oh, those are fairy tales. But fairies, there are fairy trees. I write a little bit about it in my afterword about how place and landscape in Ireland we're so connected to it, and the words and the names of things. And it's coming back now. There's even a lawyer, Sinead Mercier, who's in the west of Ireland, and has campaigns to save trees and ring forts that the government, it's always the government building roads, just like the peatland, trying to save that they divert, that they protect these precious, because now we realize that they are sacred and it is real, and it's not just a ridiculous, to ignore the fairies. So I'm hoping that at some point I can make a work looking at the myth, these old stories, and it gets to the creation stories. Here in America, you have. I opened the book with Winona LaDuke, and her incredible something that she wrote last year, and it's going back to the seasons. So I hope that's the thing about this book, is I plant seeds, and then I'm like, I don't know, will readers get that? These little, there's lots of secrets kind of sprinkled throughout the book. And so opening with Winona, who talks about the seasons and how the emperors, the January, February, March, that's the calendar of these white people who came up with that, but that's not the seasons that she lives by, coming as an activist, coming from Minnesota, Indigenous, First Nations, people who live by different seasons. The maple, the year starts when the maple is flowing and the sap is flowing, and so it's again a breaking down, and then that loops back to you ending with the seasons. We need to think of much rather than a yearly, a universal, which I think connects to the piece that we did with the pin oak. And I think that what is the word when you periscope through from time scales from something local to the universal. It's something that I think occur over and over again with work that I've done, and I think these different time scales, but also scales, and that I think we did with the piece. You'll all have to go on the Emergence website and see how that visually worked. But so myth, I think this is just the first volume of an infinite set of volumes of books about trees. There will be another one day. But I think creation stories, remembering these things that have been forced out of us in a lot of instances with Indigenous communities and the Irish. We were not allowed to use the Irish language. We were forced into hedge schools. This is a part of our culture, and it's a reckoning that we are still, I think, trying to come to terms with. Where to next? Are you watching the time for the Q&A?
I think it's time.
It kind of feels like we need questions thrown at us.
Agreed.
I have a thought, because I pre-ordered the book before, and I got it pretty early and opened it quickly. I was just thinking, because we're in a bookstore, that the Rosquet introduction where he talks about the beech tree in books, that you should maybe read that paragraph, so what would make that connection?
Would you like to read it, or?
You're
like a professional reader, writer, voice.
Alright, hold on.
Because that made me really happy.
Ross is, I don't know if you all know Ross Gay, incredible writer, and it was such an honor. He offered to write the introduction, and I still I read it and I'm still pinching myself. Like I am at all of the events. I didn't say this at the beginning, but at each one of the stops on the book tour, like tonight, I'm sitting here like, it's really happening, I'm really here, Chelsea's really here, you're all here. Like how lucky are we after these years that we've had? Like I honestly, when we were planning this book tour in the winter, like the end of last year, I was like, oh yeah, I was keeping the Tin House people happy. Becky Framer, who's the amazing woman at Tin House working on the book tour, and I was like, yeah, that sounds lovely, because it's so much work to plan a book tour. Thinking, oh bless her heart, it's never going to happen, and it's happening. We're all here. I can't believe it, and I feel like Ross, he taps into the joy, and the beauty and the delight.
Yes. So yeah, this is from the introduction by Ross Gay. The word beach, I was delighted to learn a few years back, is the Proto-Germanic antecedent for the English word book. The words for book in some other languages too derive from or overlap with words for trees. And though I suspect part of that common root has to do with trees providing the material for books, it's also the case that being in a library, I mean the best libraries, can sometimes feel like being in a forest. A wild variety of plants from the canopy to the ground, all manner of life, some of it visible, most of it not, patches of dense shade, swaths of deckled light, clearings where a huge tree just fell and you can almost hear the turning beneath toward the light. Just as being in the forest can sometimes feel like being in a library, I mean the best libraries, where what maybe begins as an illegible and almost foreboding place, see every fairy tale, see half of all horror movies, becomes with time and maybe with guidance and patience and wonder, all these voices, all these stories. Oh, with wonder we say, the trees have a language. There's a language of trees.
Yeah, and there's more of that. You just need to get the book. Yeah, so I don't know, did you just wanted to acknowledge?
I just thought that every mention here, because it's kind of like a scintillating bit.
Yeah.
I mean, there's, like, I haven't read actually everything. I haven't read it part.
Good, so you can enjoy it for years to
Still
come.
enjoying it, yes, but, and so I think I connected with you because I offered some words for to be planted in trees.
Oh yes, so maybe we messaged.
Yes, so one of your projects, and we may even tell people about that
Right,
project.
yeah,
Didn't happen,
so-
but maybe will someday.
So yeah, thank you. So the tree alphabet I made to make the book about trees, which became the language of trees. And then as soon as I had that book about trees, so this was back in 2015, and I was literally holding the book going, wow. I was like, wait a minute, it's an A to Z of trees. We could make it for a specific place, and then we could plant the messages, people's words with trees. And like plant time capsules, like you plant a seed or a sapling and then it lives on. And so I realized, oh, and because I had worked with the New York City Parks Department on the Tree Museum project, it seemed pretty obvious, and they got wind of it. So their forester at the time, Bram Gunther, invited me to be an artist in residence because they had just started that. This was back in 2018. So I worked with them to create a New York City tree alphabet. So we spent like 6 months, because coming up with the A to Z is, you know, the politics, it relates to climate change, because it was a fun project for parks to think about these deep, dark things that they can't speak about publicly. Like publicly they can't talk about non-native trees, because the public people freak out and say, oh, but we should only have native, we can't have the non-natives come in. And so it's to try and slowly, how are there other ways that we can, and fun and engaging ways, talk about trees moving, so tree migration, the fact that trees are having to move and they are having to think about planting different trees that aren't native. And for example, A in the New York City tree alphabet is ash. And for a long time I was like, we can't use ash because of the emerald ash borer beetle. Hundreds of millions of trees across the states are dead and dying, and we can't plant ash trees. So when I spoke to Ed Toth at the Native Plant Centre on Staten Island, he said, no, you've absolutely got to have ash tree as the A, because hope, that little word hope, one day, you know, they have a seed bank and they're saving the seeds, we will be able to plant ash trees again. So he was like, it's the perfect tree. So each letter of the alphabet has its own tree and the reasoning behind it. And so the New York City tree alphabet can be planted, and we invited people to send in words or dreams or what they would like to see planted, fully believing it was going to happen. And Brownsville in Brooklyn was one of the places that needed a lot of plants, because these underserved communities that have no tree cover, you know what it's like when it gets really hot, right? If you don't have a tree and you're standing out on the street waiting for a bus that never comes, you could literally die of heat exhaustion. So planting trees in these parts of the city were needed, and it's like, wouldn't this be beautiful if we could have people's message? But the reality is it's New York City, Parks Department is this huge sprawling entity, so it hasn't quite happened yet. But we do hope so. And then during 2020, I was supposed to be in Ireland for all of that year working on the Irish Tree Alphabet project. I ended up not being able to travel and get there in real life, so it all happened virtually, but I did make, there are images, this is part of Ulysses actually, translated into Irish, the Irish trees. And I'm translating Ulysses right now. While I'm sitting here, my designers in Berlin are, we're going to translate Ulysses. But the Irish tree alphabet was made in 2020. And that was, so these all exist on my website. And each one, I don't think I mentioned, but the tree alphabet is a font that you can download from my website, so anyone can write with trees. And I did the same with the New York City trees and the Irish trees. So you can write with trees and play around with it and see what happens. And same thing, we do hope in Ireland, but I haven't been able to get there because of the travel bans, and then one thing leads to another. I will be there this summer on the book tour, because the Irish UK edition is coming out June 15th, so I get to do this over there at home, which is really exciting. And hopefully we can have those conversations and actually talk about the planting. Because sometimes things like that are easier in Ireland because the scale of things, let's see. But yeah, thanks for asking about that. We do hope to plant.
Question along those lines, kind of feedback on that a bit. Since you mentioned, of course, you're a visual designer, a lot of this came from a visual place.
Artist, I'm not a designer.
I mean, that's not, visual artist.
Sorry.
You mentioned designer, my brain just sometimes says the words I just heard, but a visual artist, that you're a visual thinker, and a lot of this is words to visualizations. But I guess what I want to see, you have like the Irish tree alphabet, the city tree alphabet, different parts of the world have different trees that would be their alphabet. So it must be a challenge to decide which trees go into which place's alphabet. So my question is there a place you've developed or are developing an alphabet, a tree alphabet for, where you've had a very hard time deciding which tree should be a specific letter, and if so, how do you decide?
Yeah, so
Kind of to the
did you
actual-
all hear the question is it difficult to come up with the trees to match the letters? It's all difficult. The first one that I made for the book had to be made very quickly because that book was all made in 6 months. So I literally had one day to do the drawings, because then I had to scan the drawings and then find a designer to help me make a font, because I didn't know how to make a font. And so I just sat down with one little piece of paper and wrote A to Z to Z, and then I ended up using the first letter of the tree's name to match the letter of the alphabet that it was replacing. So A was apple, and B was beech, and C was cedar. But then there were letters like X, Y, Z, got complicated, so I had to employ the Latin names, for example. And there's lots of overlap, so with the New York City trees and with the Irish trees, because those planting zones, the New York Parks Department was lovely, they call it a planting palette. So they actually use that lovely language, so it is a palette that you are like painting the landscape. And so there are overlaps with the trees, but with all of those tree alphabets, some of the same trees appear. But it's, I feel like each one takes a lot of time to think and find the right tree. And then, as for now, I'm not actively working on new tree alphabets because I got so many requests and invitations for different cities and places that I would love to go. Like, I've always wanted to go to Peru, and Lima would be amazing, and Paris, but I'm just one person, and I'm not an artist with a big studio or with other people who do things. I do everything myself with these 2 hands and this one body that's breaking down and falling apart. So unfortunately, all of these other possible tree alphabets haven't happened, but I feel like it's an invitation that other people maybe, it's like the tree museum project that I made. It was for the Grand Concourse in the Bronx, and I had so many requests to make tree museums in different cities and different countries, and I said, but you're more than welcome to make your own tree museum. Because I physically, you know, we all need a lot of other people. We're all doing too much. And so I had to kind of learn how to say no. So that's not really answering. But then I ended up making, I think, the stone alphabet, doing the stone alphabet project, because it was a way to flip all of that on its head. There is no A to Z with the stone alphabet. It's like an infinite alphabet. And so that was really fun, because then I got to work with geologists and see that they do the same thing. I would go and sit and look at stones, like a cliff face or something, and fill my notebooks. My notebooks look like this, coincidentally, journals, black. And when we compared notebooks, this was when I was outside of Marseille in the south of France. I forget the geologist's name now, but we compared notebooks and they were almost identical. Because she sits and looks at the cracks. But when she does it, she's able to see. She has the knowledge. She would call it like the goggles. So you can read those lines and know what they mean, and through tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of thousands years, and see how what it's saying. And I knew that I was reading it, and I was trying to write it, but I don't quite have the knowledge. And I feel like a lot of my work is maybe like that, trying to understand, and maybe this gets back to combining the text with the visuals. How do you explain something or understand it, and communicate that with others? So yeah, the infinite alphabet was fun. I really hoped that I could have somehow made the font so that every time you pressed, for example, A, it would be completely random, so it would always be different. So it would be like impossible to translate or impossible to read.
Maybe time for one more question.
No pressure on the last one.
I have a fun question about the tactility of this. Did you think about the material of printing your books?
Oh yes, yes. So with the book about trees, I sort of wanted to bring it on the book tour, but I'm trying to travel as lightly as possible. I don't know if any of you have seen it, but when it was printed, it sold out before it was even printed, before it went to the printer, because I think people saw the images of what we were planning, and it was just so beautiful. So it was the same kind of paper as this, Monk, and it was printed in Europe. And I worked with the Broken Dimanche Press, was the publisher in Berlin. I went over, I lived in Berlin, worked with the designers in Berlin who are working with me on translating Ulysses, the same designers, and I think the papers were really uber important. And so they interviewed as many paper people as possible, but at the very beginning we said we're probably going to use Munken. So any paper geeks out there will know Munken. It's this really delicious, lush paper. And they are in Munkedal in Sweden. And so they have their own forest, their own facilities, their own water. Everything is an ecological, sustainable system. But that word sustainable has been so kind of broken and taken and destroyed. They are doing real working with the land, and it goes back to, Munkedal comes from the monks, so it was started way back, I can't remember in what century, and they now, this paper mill, harvest, so they could tell me exactly which trees went into the book. So within the book about trees, I have a conversation with the paper mill saying, we have an edition of so many books, the book is this big, and that many pages, how many trees, what kind of trees, species, will go into the making of the book, and all of that was contained within the book. And where did those trees come from? And then for the second printing, I had thought, well, if I had a budget, we had zero budget, I could go to Sweden, to the forest, and I could have met the trees and the whole forest. Speaking of forests and being there, I didn't really answer your question about the forest, but we can talk about that another time. And then I could have planted something into, or seeded something into the paper pulp. So they sent me photos of the actual paper pulp, but of course I had no budget, so I didn't get to go to Sweden, so I didn't plant anything. You know, seeds, for example, could have been put into the pulp, but the photos of the actual pulp were included in the second printing of that book. So when Tin House Maisie Cochran, the editor at Tin House, invited me to make a beautiful book about trees. I said, well, the paper's really important. We can't just print on any old paper. We also can't just print in China. So many books are printed in China. So many environmental nature books are printed in China. And I was like, So it's printed, locally within here. This big, huge, I don't know what's local in this scale of America, still blows my mind. And the paper was so important. But thanks to Richard Powers, another Emergence family member, but some of you might have heard of this book that he wrote called The Overstory. So when Richard was working on that, and it was published by Norton, he said, look, this is a book about trees. It's really, really important that we have an ethically sourced, a paper that cares about trees. We can't just kill trees and harm trees in the making of this book. So he worked, Norton had I don't know if this is way too much information, but some of you maybe are book geeks, so will appreciate all of this. But Beth Steedle was the production manager on The Overstory for Richard Powers, and did all of the research and found this paper, the exact same paper that we have in this book, which is recycled. So it's a recycled paper, but it's not bleached, it's none of those awful things, it is what it is. No trees were harmed in the making of the book. And it's thanks to Richard, who's just one person, right? Okay, obviously he's a very talented and gifted person, but one person saying, look, this means a lot. And it was really difficult, like paper production, all of these systems have to be questioned, and we all have to do that. So he stood up and said something, and that pushed the industry, and now it's getting easier, and it's not easy, but it's becoming easier. It's talked about more, people are aware of it, the publishers are aware of it, and Tin House ended up hiring Beth to work with me on this book. And so we had that direct contact with the paper. So we have, thanks to Richard, so at a cellular, like Richard shared a sentence, I think it's just one sentence or two sentences, because that's all you need from somebody. Not that the longer things are great. I just dug a hole there and threw myself into it. The gift of the gab, I don't have that. So Richard shared that, so there's words from him and trees from him in the book, but at a cellular level, the paper is thanks to him, because I was fighting the same fight, but he'd already done it years ago and pushed, and it goes back to what we were saying about the community coming together to push the system, right? We have to do it. So you might feel like, oh, what difference is it going to make if I stand up? Maybe I'll just annoy people, but you have to do what real feels right in your heart and inside, and then that pushes, and then the conversation. It's like we all need to talk about the climate emergency. We all need to talk about trees, and then that spreads. It's like, we need a viral loveness seed. Maybe I didn't include the wildflower seeds. I made a wildflower alphabet for New York City because it's much easier to plant wildflower seeds than tree seeds. Tin House and really hoped we could have packets of tree seeds to give away with the books. And I was like, yeah, that would be beautiful, but it's really complicated and complex to plant tree seeds. So it was through conversations with Patrick Over in the Parks Department. He said, Katie, you really should make a wildflower alphabet. And I was like, oh, that's going to be a lot of work, and I don't really have time to do it, but I did it just because it seemed so beautiful. So now you can I made just a limited number of Love, L-O-V-E, those wildflowers, and made seed packets, and Patrick collected and shared those seeds with me so you could sprinkle love around New York City. But maybe we should just end there on that big